living in Babylon. We live in a world that's different than maybe we grew up in. The culture has changed. The attitude towards church has changed. Maybe the things that we held dear to us when we were young is not the things that everybody else holds dear in the society. But does that mean we should give up or quit or throw in the towel or just throw our hands up and say, okay, whatever? No. In Daniel, we find the story, and I would encourage you to check out right now, media, where my Sunday school class, we're doing a study that's called Thriving in Babylon. It's Larry Osborne, not Osborne, but Osborne. And he's a pastor, and he does a study called Thriving in Babylon. It's really good. But as we look at Daniel, and we study the life of Daniel, and I sometimes I prepare messages, and sometimes they come to me easier than others, and this is one of those messages that was like, felt like I was kind of hitting a wall, and just wasn't real as easy for me as sometimes others are. Maybe it's because I felt like I needed to get a lot in and wanted to share a lot of things with you. But I wanted to kind of go through this with you today. And so we're going to look at living in Babylon. But first, let's look at a map that kind of represents the travel that Daniel and his companions had to go through. Because Nebuchadnezzar, the king, had overtaken Jerusalem. And so they had been, taken away from their homeland of Judea and Jerusalem, and they were brought into the leadership and ownership of the king. And they were to serve the king. So they had to trek 500 miles from where they were, the bottom of that red line, all the way over to where Babylon is. Put that perspective today, if you think where Jerusalem and Israel is today, they would have to travel all the way inside into Iraq, is where Babylon, the city of Babylon, used to be. So they had to travel all that distance. What a culture shock Daniel and his friends had to go through, realizing that they were being taken out of their homeland and taken somewhere different. And so we look at Daniel chapter 1, verse 3 and 4. And we're going to stay in the book of Daniel today, but we're going to jump around a little bit. So have your Bibles ready and your Bible apps and be able to look through this with me. And I would encourage you maybe sometime this week to really dive into Daniel, especially the 4 chapters that we're covering today. Mainly the 3 chapters, but we're going to talk a little bit about chapter 4 as well. So verse 3, it says here, Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years. After that, they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judea: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Ezra. The chief official gave them new names to Daniel. The name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. Thank you. My brain, because my mom used to have this great tape, and if anybody can find this was it was a cassette tape, and it was a great story. They had this great song called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Oh. We can't find that story, but it was an awesome story. That's why I don't know why I'm having such an issue with that. But anyhow, the thing of it is, as we look at this morning, I want to kind of help you understand that there was quite a culture shock for these 4 men to go from where they were used to and then be changed and have this whole different life, this different culture. So I want to look at some of the things that they had to go through. So the culture shock, Babylonians tried to assimilate them. And maybe you're a Star Trek fan, you like the Borg and all that. Maybe you don't know what I mean by that. And that's foreign to you. But what would happen is how the Babylonians would come in and take somebody over is they would come in and they would take or maybe kill off all the people that were important in that country. And they would take out some of the young people that they thought were going to be prosperous and good, and they would train them and kind of convert them to be their kind of leaders. So they'd take the best of what they had, take it back to their homeland, train them for 3 years. So we're thinking about college students being changed, taken, and kind of modified and educated in the Babylonian education system. So they would learn the language, learn the culture, and really kind of identify themselves no longer from where they came from, but who they are now as a Babylonian. So this would be part of the process that they would do. They would change their thinking with an education, a Babylonian education for 3 years. They would change their thought process so they would understand the new culture they're a part of. They'd also change their loyalty by changing their names. Every one of them got a different name. And each one of those names represented a different god that the Babylonians believed in. So Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and Daniel's name, Belshazzar, I didn't say that quite right. All those names were changed because they were in a new country and wanted them to have a different identity. The last thing is they changed their lifestyle by changing their diet. So they would do all these things to kind of get their mindset to be focused on who they were now rather than who they used to be. And this is one of the things, this is where Daniel takes a stand. And a lot of times when our cultures change, when things are different than what we are used to, we have to make up our mind who we're going to be. And we have to determine ahead of time, just like Daniel does here, what are we going to be? What are we going to stand for? What are some of the principles, morals, values that we're going to hold to so that we defile ourselves? But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food or the wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now, God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you look worse than the other young men your age? The king would have my head because of you. Then Daniel said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Ezra, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to do this and tested them for 10 days. So the point I wanted to make today is that he was resolved not to defile himself. And I think in this culture, that's one of the biggest things that we can do to take a stand is maybe you can't control everything in your life. Maybe you work at a job that the culture is totally different than being here at church. I realized that when I worked at the Gusky shelter. I worked there for a period of 10 years. And I knew I had kids that would cuss, and I would have staff that would use language that I wasn't really primarily like or accustomed to. And they would have conversations about things that I didn't do or I didn't participate in. But we can choose to control certain things about ourselves that we don't defile ourselves for God. And that's what Daniel did. He went and asked permission from this guard. And remember, there was a lot online for this. There was a lot online because it was his head at stake. But he's like, hey, can I just eat vegetables? Can I just eat this food? Give it a try for 10 days and see what happens. And because Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Ezra honored God those 10 days, and because they were trying to do their best to honor their God and taking a stand in this small but effective way to say, we're not going to allow us to compromise our faith or compromise who we are, we're going to try to do something that we can hold claim in this small way to still be honoring God. We have to make a decision in our own hearts and our own lives to have a resolve about us to say, here's my morals, here's my values. Just because everybody else lies or everybody else cheats or everybody does this. I remember working at the shelter, and I'm not trying to be mean or negative in any way, but I knew that sometimes people would turn in their time sheets with not actual times of what they worked. Maybe give themselves an extra half hour here or an extra hour there. Or when they turned in their expense sheets, maybe not everything was actually for the kids that were ordered or bought. It would be so easy just to follow that same suit or do that same thing. But when you live by morals and values, you really need to stick to those morals and principles and values that you have and resolve yourself before you go into that. I'm not going to make those choices. I'm not going to make that decision because I want to honor God with my life. Just because everybody else in the culture may see things differently than you or operate in a different fashion doesn't mean for yourself that you should go along that same way or that same path. If God is important to you, if our faith in Christ is important to us, we need to have the resolve to say, this is the line. These are the lines in my own life. These are my convictions that I'm going to live out, that I'm going to honor God with, that I'm going to show that I love God and I honor God with myself. And we may have to be like Daniel and say, can I do this? Can I just try this out? Can I just show you how this might be beneficial by me doing this? By me being able to work in this way. What I find with Daniel is he was very respectful to the guard. He was very concerning about him, but he was also wanting to stretch that to where say, how can I still honor my faith and still honor God through this? And still, be a blessing to the king who I serve. And we can do that same thing in our own environments where we work at. We can honor Christ. We can honor God, even though the culture of that environment may be different than what God would really want there in that culture. Moving on, Daniel chapter 2, verse 8 through 9. And I know we're skipping a lot, so I'm sorry about that. I apologize. But I want to get through some of the heart of this. And I can tell you about the story of what happens here. Is that God gives Nebuchadnezzar a dream. And it's a dream that really disturbs Nebuchadnezzar. He can't sleep and he's very upset. And he wants it to be interpreted. But he's kind of tired of the lies, I would say. Kind of tired of these people that are supposed to be these wise people around him. That kind of just tell him things that maybe he wants to hear because they're afraid that he's going to be upset and kill him. So he's wanting truth. He's wanting something to be real and sincere. He's wanting to see actual things take place. And so Nebuchadnezzar is upset. We look in verse 8 here. It says, then the king answered. He's talking to his wise officials, the people that he is supposed to advise them and discern these dreams. The king answered, I am certain that you are trying again to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation would change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. The astrologers answered the king, there is no one on earth who can do what the king asked. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asked is so too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. Looking at verse 12 here, it says this. Then this made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men in Babylon, and of course, including Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and the men were sent out to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. So you have this king who's tired of the lies, tired of the fakeness, and tired of these people that are supposed to be magicians and people that are able to do these great things, and astrologers, and having these people around that are supposed to be wise and have all this wisdom around him, but yet he's not getting any truth. So he's putting the challenge out there that if you guys are really good at interpreting dreams, you should already know the dream. If you're really good at what you do, you should already know what this dream is and be able to explain it to me. And of course, their defense is no one can do that. No one is able to do that. Daniel hears about the issue. He's smart. He's got wisdom. He understands, and he goes to the king and says, "King, if you give me just one night, I'll be able to understand your dream and relay your dream and then interpret the dream for you." So him and his friends, in verse 17, then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Ezra. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. See, here's the thing I want us to kind of think about today is that God gave Nebuchadnezzar the dream, right? I want to show you an image of the dream. So we're going to see this image of the dream and I'm not going to read that part for you, but it's there for you to read. But Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. Daniel comes in and says, here's the dream that you had. You dreamed about a statue. And this statue was this magnificent statue that was strong, that was there. And he goes on to interpret the dream for the king. He says the gold represents your empire. And all these other empires are going to come in the future. And these empires will be, huge and big and massive empires. But then he goes on and talks about this rock that no man had made. And it comes in and it crushes the statue. And as you can see here, that the rock is really a representation of Christ's kingdom. That all these other kingdoms have come and gone, but Christ's kingdom is still being built, and it ends up being a mountain that's built. And this kingdom will last forever and ever and ever. In other words, all of us that have chosen to be believers in Jesus Christ, we're a part of a new kingdom. And our government is set up by God. And our king is Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And one day we'll enter his kingdom, and it'll be forever. And no one will be able to destroy it. So he's saying, all you men that think you're wise and think you're great, Nebuchadnezzar, you think you're great, you think you are mighty, but I am even mightier than all the kingdoms that will come during your time and the time to come after. And so we see all these representations of all these kingdoms coming and are here and will be here for a moment and then go away. But God, through Jesus Christ, is setting a kingdom that will be forever and ever and ever. One great thing about this dream is that God had given it to Nebuchadnezzar, but I think the dream was not only for Nebuchadnezzar. More importantly, I think this dream was for Daniel. I think Daniel was looking for some hope. You got to think that going through this culture shock, being at school for 3 years, and then being in the service of the king, where is God? The other thing I didn't mention that is so true is that they plundered the temple of God. Not only that, but Daniel's family in all likelihood were killed. Part of the assimilation process is to kill all the wealthy people, all the leaders, get rid of those, and then take some of the younger people, take them out and raise them up and train them to be Babylonians. But then you leave the poor people so that they can become the middle class, and then they buy into what you're doing because they're like, wow, I'm better off now because of the Babylonians coming in and taking over. But think about this. Where was God when the temple was plundered? That had to be in the back of Daniel's mind. Where were you? Why would you let this happen? It'd be like somebody coming in here, taking everything out, taking the cross down, taking the chairs out, taking everything that we hold dear in this church that we've built, that you all have worked hard to put together. But this was the temple of God. And everything was taken out. Where was God? Daniel, through this dream, he sees God's hand at work. He knows that God allowed the temple to be raided. He knows that God allowed him to be brought to Babylon. He knows that God wants him to be a servant for the king. Through this dream, God is speaking to Daniel that I'm in control, not just for Nebuchadnezzar's empire, the Babylonian empire, but I am in control for all the kingdoms that come and go. I am the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Pretty powerful. So this is Daniel's prayer after he receives the dream. Praise be to the God of heaven forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He disposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and the hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells within him. I thank you and praise you, God of my ancestors. You gave me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we ask of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. So Daniel goes before the king in verse 29. And as your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mystery showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me, not because I am have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but that so that your majesty may know the interpretation, and that you may understand what went through your mind. Verse 36, this was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your majesty, you are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory in your hands. He has placed all kinds of the beasts of the field, the birds of the sky, wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. The great God has shown you, the king, what will take place in the future. The dream is true. The interpretation is trustworthy. What's great about this story is that Nebuchadnezzar starts to realize there's something to his God. It starts opening up his heart towards the God that Daniel serves. He actually bows down and kind of worships in a moment there, worships the God that Daniel serves. Doesn't fully convert yet, but worships and honors the God of Daniel because he was given the interpretation. The next point I want to share with you is we got to give God credit when God does something good in our lives. When God works in our life, we got to share it. When God gives us blessings, we got to share it. In this culture, people need to see why we do good things and how we do good things. It's not because so much of our abilities, but God's ability to work through us. In your work profession, in what you do in this culture, give God credit for allowing you to have success, allowing you to do the things, the gifts and talents that you have. Give God the credit for that so that they can see that God is at work in your life, that he's doing things in your life to help you and give you strength. That's what I love about Daniel, is that he recognized that God was on him, that God had given the power, the wisdom to be able to discern this dream, to understand these things. And he gave credit to the king. He recognized it wasn't his ability, but it was God's ability working through him. And that's what the culture needs. The people that you work with, the people that you're around in your culture and your area need to see how God is blessing you and how God is working in your life. And if you give God credit through how he helps you, how he encourages you, people are going to see that difference in your life. They're going to be able to recognize there's something different about you and see the God that helps you, encourages you, and supports you, to give you the ability, the talents, the wisdom that could only come from God, not from human standards, but from God. So after giving God credit, we look at Daniel chapter 3, verse 16 through 18. We look at this great story like I sang in the song, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. If anybody could find that tape for me, that would be awesome. You have it? Oh, you've been keeping it from me. Sorry, family dispute right there. Well, we'll see. Maybe I'll get it back. I think it was hers to begin with, though. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him in verse 16, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into a blazing furnace, the God that we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods, worship the images of gold you have set up. So I call this faith in action, faith in action. I've been reading a book that's Fox's Book of Martyrs. It's really interesting. It's not really so much in the sense an uplifting book because we're reading about martyrs for the sake of Christ being killed, people that have been killed for what they believe in. A lot of times we think about, the disciples gave their life, but thousands of people, I'm in the 150 to 200 range, and to hear thousands of people giving their lives for Christ. And some of the stories are like, wow, God moved in a way to kind of like, whoa, something happened there to make it like more difficult for them to kill that person, or that person made a statement that was just inspiring. But then there were other times that people just died, that nothing happened. See, if our faith is real and sincere, then our faith is going to speak what we believe every day of our life. And it's going to be a commitment that we make that no matter what happens, we're willing to let what happens happen, because we believe in this. We believe in it, that it's truth. We believe that it's real. We believe that Jesus did die. That statement of that song that we talk about, we believe those things. We believe that there is one God. We believe that Jesus Christ was here to save us, that there was a death, there was a resurrection, and we believe those things, and we hold to those things. I believe that's truth, not fiction. I don't believe it's just a fairy tale. I don't feel like it's just a story. It's truth. And that truth has hit me. And it's become real to me in my own life. So in other words, no matter what happens to me, I hope to be found worthy, that no matter what would take place in my life. And we live in a country where we're given this freedom. We should be very thankful. When celebrating the 4th of July, I'm thankful to be an American. But there are other countries where they are persecuted to the point that they have to face death for their faith. There's like 17 countries in the whole world that still Christianity is illegal. You're not allowed to practice Christianity. You're not allowed to serve God, at least out in public. But if this is real, if this is true, what demonstration does the culture know that our faith is real? What links, what things are we willing to do to let people know that our faith is real? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, this was a crucial point for them. They weren't going to bow down and worship a gold statue. They realized that they weren't going to do that. That's just the point where they had to draw the line. Yeah, we can take your other cultural differences. We can hear about these other gods that you serve. We can understand all these other rules and all these other things, but we cannot bring ourselves to worship this other God, this statue that you've set up. No matter what comes, we believe that our God will take care of us, whether he takes us out of this fiery furnace or whether we ultimately meet him someday. No matter what, we're going to put our faith in action. Now, this story has a great result. And I really think it was not only for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's, for their difference to be made in their life, but also Nebuchadnezzar. 28, it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angels and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defiled the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut down into pieces, and their house be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. So after they were thrown in the fire furnace, most of us know this story. Nebuchadnezzar looked in and was like, Didn't we put 3 in there? Yet I see a 4th that looks like the son of the God. And he calls to him. I love how he calls to him. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, can you come out? Because it looked like they were having a party in there. They were having a good time in there. And he's like calling them out to come out. And not any part of their bodies, not any part of their hair was scorched in any way. They were perfectly kept from that fire. Even the 2 soldiers that had to push them in were burnt up. But yet they were spared. And like I said, I don't think it was just for the benefit of Shadrach and Meshach that they were spared. I think it was the benefit of Nebuchadnezzar, because we see here a path that God is really wanting to speak at the heart and the soul of Nebuchadnezzar. He's doing it through dreams. He's doing it through the witness of Daniel and the witness of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And just like when we reach our culture, we may not always see the difference right away in people's lives. We may not always see the difference that we're making and how we can affect change or help people come to know Christ. And I know working at the shelter, it seemed like it took a while for me to gain trust, people to respect me, to understand who I was. But there were many occasions where kids came to Christ through that. One girl who was pregnant came here and we baptized her here about 6 years ago. You may think the culture's changed, and it probably has. But it doesn't mean we can't be effective in what we do for Christ. It doesn't mean we can't make a difference in this life. We can't change hearts and minds for Christ. But I tell you this, that our faith has to be action. People have to see that our faith's sincere. We have to give God credit, and we have to have resolve in ourselves to say, I'm not going to defile myself. I'm not going to do things that I know God would not be happy with or be proud of me doing. We've got to live out those personal convictions that we have too. If you believe something's not right, don't you go and do it. Don't you do it. It says, and then it goes on to say, well, let's finish this up. Daniel chapter 4. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but it's a great chapter. And kind of explain what happens before this. As Nebuchadnezzar is kind of led, given another dream, another vision. And he dreams this huge tree. And this tree has all these animals and the birds of the air were taken care of by this tree. And this tree was providing shelter for all the animals and all the birds. And all of a sudden an angel comes down, or a presence comes down and tells that to be cut down. And there just a stump was left. And all the animals and all the birds were scattered away from this great tree. And Daniel, he can't find anybody to interpret the dream. And actually, if you look at chapter 4, which I'd encourage you to, it's interesting because Nebuchadnezzar is actually, his words are in chapter 4 of Daniel. He's speaking. He allowed pride to build up in his heart to the point where he thought he earned all this. That he had done all these things and that he himself was the greatest ever. And he let pride build up in him. And Daniel even warned him beforehand after he had this dream and saying, King, if this was for somebody else, I know that would be great, but this dream really, it speaks to you. And it speaks to you about your pride. And if you don't do the things that God is asking, if you don't give credit where credit is due and honor God, then for 7 years you're going to be like a crazy man. And you're going to be insane, eating grass of the ground for 7 years. And this literally did happen because he built up so much pride in himself that God allowed him to go insane for 7 years. And for those 7 years, he ate the grass of the fields and he was naked. And he went around acting crazy. But then God, this is what happened. Then after that 7 years, God, this is what Nebuchadnezzar says in verse 34. I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven. My insanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures for generations to generations. All the people of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the powers of the peoples of the earth. No one can hold his hand back or say to him, "What have you done?" It's amazing in it because the first dream of the statue is really kind of like this continual conversation God is having with Nebuchadnezzar, that I'm here and I'm greater than anything else in this world. You need to look to me. I'm the one that's allowed you to have all these things. And I want you to recognize me in your life. So after this point of going insane for a while, he recognizes that God is the God who is above all gods, who's the God that will live forever. And he comes in relationship with God after this. As I leave you today, as we finish up, in our culture, there's a lot of things we may not like. I mean, this United States is a great, great country. One of my favorite presidents, Abraham Lincoln, I had to go the chance this summer to go to Washington, D.C., and I got to see the first time the Abraham Lincoln Memorial, which was neat, to read some of his speeches, of course, that he wrote, and just be there. Just kind of neat. Great, great country, great leaders that have come through our doors. Well, we all probably recognize that our country has changed in so many ways. But does that mean that God's not in control? Does that mean that we should give up or lose heart or lose hope? See, I believe we were born for such a time as this, that we could be that light, that we could be that source of strength, that God could raise up leaders in this generation to speak of his name, to honor him, to let our light shine, to be that salt and light that we talked about in that song. Again, I go back to this and leave you with this. Make sure you have a resolve about you not to defy yourself. What does that mean? I believe that there are things that the Bible teaches that we should hold dear to ourselves and make sure that we do not break. The Ten Commandments could be a great starting point, of course. But maybe there's other things that we look in the Gospels and through the Old Testament that we try to live up to. But then there are also personal convictions that maybe we've had all along. Certain things that we know that we don't want to cross. There's things that I don't want to cross. There's things that you probably don't feel like you should cross. And we need to, as you do that, as Romans talks about, if you look at Romans chapter 14, Paul talks about that we should live out to our convictions by faith, living it to honor God. In other words, if there's something that you don't do that somebody else does, you're doing it to honor God. Not to judge somebody else, but you're doing it to honor God. Give God credit. It's an important thing. Let people around you know what holds you up, what strengthens you, how you work through your problems. Where's your strength come from? Who's your refuge? Who's your shelter? Who's your Savior? You don't have to be preachy, but you give God credit where credit is due. And lastly, faith in action. No matter what the consequences are, no matter what happens to you, that your faith is being displayed so that people can see that you're legit, you're real, you're sincere about who you live for and who you serve. Let's pray. Lord, I just thank you so much for everything you do. Thank you for this day. I pray, Lord, you just, as we went through all those scriptures and as we talked a lot, I just pray, Lord, that maybe some things can ring out in people's hearts today, that they'll respond to you. Lord, I know sometimes we watch the news and we can become downhearted or discouraged about things in this life, but I know that you're in control. And I do believe that you called us to be born at this time, and this is such a time that we can represent you, honor you, glorify you, that we can help people to see you. And we don't need to be pushy about it. We just need to live it out. We need to honor you with our own life. And that defiling ourselves, that's a personal thing that we can do, that we can guard against. And Lord, help us to put our faith in action. Help us to demonstrate that. And as we do that, give you credit for what happens. Give you thanks, give you praise for what takes place. I thank you for the story of Nebuchadnezzar. I thank you that you worked in your heart, that you loved him, that you had a desire to have a relationship with him, and that you worked through Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you revealed yourself through their lives. Lord, I pray that I can be that I can be an instrument to help people see you in this life. The way I conduct myself, the way I live my life, that would be honoring to you. And forgive me. Please forgive me when I fail you, when I stumble. Help me to be true to you. Help me to honor you with my life. That I can be an ambassador for you, that I can be salt and light. Just be with us this morning. In your wonderful name, I pray, Jesus. Amen.